Yeah,
Very
yeah, it's on now.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is the final session of fourth-day online lecture series organizing by the Department of English of THK Jain College. I, Oindrila Sengupta, in charge of the Department of English of THK Jain College, welcome all the honorable speakers, respected principals, Dr. Mausumi Singh, and all the participants in this session. We already had three important sessions. The speakers were Dr. Chandra Vishwas, Associate Professor in English, St. Xavier's College, Autonomous, Kolkata, Dr. Professor
Oindrila, your voice cannot be heard clearly.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, yeah.
So, we already had three important sessions earlier, and the speakers were Dr. Chandrani Vishwas, Associate Professor in English, St. Xavier's College, Autonomous, Kolkata, Dr. Mohua Bhaumik, Associate Professor and Head, European Memorial College, Kolkata, and Dr. Shukrata Assistant Professor and Head of Postgraduate Department of English, St. Xavier's College, Autonomous. The deliberative lecturers are Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of Gay Alfred Rock and Raleigh, and Arthur Miller's Death of the Self. Today we have with us Dr. Professor and Head of the Department of English of the Bengal State University as the speaker of today's session. We are really thankful to all the speakers.
Sorry to interrupt you, Oindrila. Your
Yes,
voice
ma'am.
is getting cracked. Your voice is not audible at all. Okay. So
But ma'am,
please
from my end,
but I think it's not clear.
is it
Because
fine now, ma'am?
what I can follow from the chat box, your voice is not clear. I am also getting manifesting problem in listening. Okay, it's not clear.
Is it fine, ma'am?
Now it's okay. Now it's fine.
Okay, okay, ma'am. So, I
Can you
really.
please repeat the name of today's speaker?
Hello, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, can you please repeat the name of today's speaker once
Yes,
again?
yes. Sure, sure. Today we have with us Dr. Chandrava Chakraborty, Professor and Head of the Department of English of West Bengal State University, as a speaker of today's session. And we are really thankful to all the honorable speakers. The rest of the session will be moderated by Professor Deepayan and Professor Swara. Now I would like to hand the session to Professor.
Thank you, Oindrila Di. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So lots of connectivity issue because of the weather, because of this internet dependency. But anyway, thank you, Oindrila Di. As Professor Oindrila Sengupta has said, today we have with us Dr. Chandrava Chakraborty. It is a matter of honor and privilege for me to introduce Dr. Chandrava Chakraborty. For me, CC ma'am, as the speaker of today's session. Dr. Chandrava Chakraborty is a professor and head Department of English and director of the Center for Studies in Gender, Culture and Media of West Bengal State University. Her research interests include literature of the long 18th century, 19th century Bengal, gender and cultural studies. Among her recent publications is her monograph, Gendering the Nation, Identity, Politics and the English Stage, published by Orient Black Swan in 2013. She has also edited a volume, Tagore's Ideas of the New Woman, The Making and Unmaking of Female Subjectivity, published by Sri Samya Sage Publications. She has an article relocating Tagore's Binodini, new spaces of representation in Riduparna Ghosh's Chokher Bali in the IAFOR Journal of Literature and Librarianship, Japan 2013. She has contributed a chapter, The King in Rabindranath Tagore's drama, Political Power Inscribed in Raja, in the book titled The Politics and Reception of Rabindranath Tagore's Drama, edited by A. Bhattacharya and M. Ranganathan, published by Routledge, USA in 2014. Her essay, Place and Space in Tagore's Raktokorobi and Muktodhara, has been published in June 2020 in an edited volume, Rabindranath Tagore's Drama in Perspective of Indian Theatre, published by Anthem Press, UK. Dr. Chandrava Chakraborty, CC ma'am, was also my professor and dissertation guide during my masters at West Bengal State University. These were two very important academic years of my life. Under her immense guidance and support, ma'am, I have learned so much from you. So this is a great day for me to join for you that you have joined this session for our college. Now we shall move on to our main session. The title of Chandrava ma'am's talk today is The Home and the World of Nationalist Thought, a reading of Tagore's political novels. Before moving on, I would like to welcome all the participants once again and would like to make a few requests. Please keep your microphones muted and videos off throughout the session. Please don't click on the present now anytime during the session to present your screen. Post your comments or questions in the Google Meet or YouTube chat box. After the main lecture, with ma'am's permission, we will conduct an interactive session. So we will take your comments and questions from there. Now, without wasting any more time, I'll hand over the session to our honorable speaker, Dr. Chandrava Chakraborty. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and a very good evening to all the participants. I'm indeed thankful to the authority of THK Jain College and its English department for making me a part of their online lecture series. And thank you, Deepayan, once again for a very intimate introduction. As Deepayan has requested me that I should be speaking on Tagore's nationalist thoughts, and especially focus on the home and the world, since it is part of the UG syllabus. So I've decided to use the broad context of Tagore's thoughts on nationalisms as a background, as a background for his political novels. I shall be talking about Gora and Charutai, but my main focus will be on Ghore Baire, or the home and the world. So let's start with this. The title, as already been said, is The Home and the World of the Indian Nationalist Thought, a reading of Tagore's political novels. Well, reading Tagore's political novels has been always an unsettling experience, not only for his contemporary readers, but also for posterity, causing several reinterpretations or rereadings, such as Neil Mukherjee's adaptation Past Continues in 2008, the films Elas Charodhai 2012, and the very recent Ghore Baire Aaj 2019. Now, the retellings bring to the fore the sustained importance of the categories of the home and the world in the endless narrations of the Indian nation since the colonial times to the present. The act of defining the concept of the home and the world can be baffling and frustrating, as these not only subsume layers of connotations ranging from the private to the public, but also the existence of overlapping and complementary domains of mutual significations. Moreover, the translation of the Bengali Ghor and Baire to home and the world creates another problem of understanding, as the Bengali Bahir is not really translatable to the world in English. Whereas Ghor means home and not house. The broad connotation of the word Ghor points to a spatial concept signifying the domestic or the private sphere as opposed to the public sphere, which is the Bahir. Shivli Mallet, in her article, Understanding Home, claims that home is a spatial and relational concept from which people venture out into the world and to which they hope to return. Journeys away from the home establish the thresholds and boundaries of home, and the experiences of home influence the meaning and significance of the journeys beyond it. In her article, House as a Symbol of the Self, Claire Cooper refers to the relation between home and identity and or self. Tagore's Bahir, or the world, not only encapsulated the tumultuous political events of his days, but also transnational influences impacting the Bengali upper and middle class society. Gora, Bimola, and Ella, the protagonists of Tagore's three political novels, namely Gora, The Home and the World, and Charodhaya, or 4 chapters, respectively, make their transits into the world, gathering experiences that shattered or reshaped their lives. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. If there is a problem, do let me know.
Sure.
Yeah. What is this world of Tagore? It is certainly a complex blend of socio-political reality and individual perception inflected by a selective presentation of what the author considered necessary for creative and aesthetic organization. In Sahitya Oitihashikota, 1941, Tagore addresses himself in the third person and writes, this is from Tagore, in his own field of creativity, Rabindranath has been entirely alone and tied to no public by history. The creator gathers some of the material from historical narratives and some from his social environment, but the material by itself does not make him a creator. What came to be reflected was not any political order at all, but the history of the will and woe of human life. This is Tagore's way of responding to the Marxist of the 1930s, who accused him for his negligence of historical facts. While the 19th century materialists confined history to factuality, the German philosopher Heidegger redefined the world as constituted by something called facticity, which is much more than concrete facts. It informs our existence the moment we are thrown into this world. Hence, even though Tagore's world of facts was constituted by the epistemic shifts culminating in the Bengal Renaissance, the various reform movements and growth of nationalist thought, the redefining of familial and gender relationships, and the interdependence of the private and the public sphere in the construction of Bengali Hindu modernity, Tagore was always writing against the grain. Hence, his embodiments of colonial modernity bring to the fore the trials and tribulations of an inner world torn asunder by the demands of the public sphere, and he submits its ideologies to brutal scrutiny. This critical insight prevented Tagore from being, in the words of the leading Marxist critic George Lukács, a revolutionary. He remained, in Lukács's words, a sentimental bourgeois, and Lukács says that you know this Tagore, he's a petty bourgeois, he's not at all a progressive writer. All of the 3 political novels of Tagore were responses to Indian nationalism, resulting in the Swadeshi boycott movement and the extremist resistance against colonial rule. They explore and critique nationalism as a derivative concept, inimical to the cultural health of India as a country, a concept thoughtlessly imitated and hyped without considering its quote-unquote illegitimate birth. In a letter to Jagadananda Roy, Tagore describes nationalism as a bhaugolik apodevata, or a geographical demon. In his days, apologists of nationalism were strong and many in number. The aggressive nationalists tried to make significant use of the British presence in India and identified the lack of nationalism to be a notable flaw in Indian society and also the cause of its backwardness. The path to overcome this weakness was to infuse people's mind with Western nationalist thoughts and the spirit of rational learning through the spread of Western education. Aurobindo Ghosh, the leader of a revolutionary nationalist group that plunged into violence in the name of God and Bhagavad Gita, raised nationalism to a transcendent level. This is what he says in The Life of Nationalism. Nationalism is an avatar, meaning an incarnation of divinity, and cannot be slain. Nationalism is a divinely appointed Shakti of the eternal and must do its God-given work. Unquote. The euphoria created by such articulations of revolutionary spirit gathered support from many. Tagore, with passing time, became skeptical of such passionate articulations and felt that nationalism was neither universal nor a path of convergence or integration. Contrarily, it was ruthless, romantic, irrational, to a large extent, and a most pernicious export from Europe. Let's see what he says in his collection of essays called Nationalism. India has never had a real sense of nationalism. Even though from childhood, I had been taught that idolatry of the nation is almost better than reverence for God and humanity, I believe I have outgrown that teaching, and it is my conviction that my countrymen will truly gain their India by fighting against the education which teaches them that a country is greater than the ideals of humanity. The dangers of nationalism had become evident to Tagore in the wake of the First World War. He believed that the horrors of the war should have opened people's mind to explore the possibilities of a universal movement that would promise a better future to mankind. He was particularly concerned that India must resist the rising tide of nationalism that was sweeping through Europe, which he feared would compromise India's history and identity as a culture and bring it under the shadow of the West. So he warned, we in India must make up our minds that we cannot borrow other people's history, and that if we stifle our own, we are committing suicide. When you borrow things that do not belong to your life, they only serve to crush your life. I believe that it does India no good to compete with Western civilization in its own field. This is from Nationalism. In Tagore's view, nationalism was only an organization of Excuse me. Is there a problem with the audio? Hello?
No, there's no problem. No, there's no intervention.
Somebody is talking at the background.
I request the participants once again, please put your microphones to mute and your videos off so that there is no technical glitches here on our end. Thank you. Sorry, ma'am. Please continue.
It's okay. In Tagore's view, nationalism was only an organization of politics and commerce that brings harvests of wealth or carnivals of materialism. I'm quoting these expressions from Tagore. In a letter addressed to C.F. Andrews, he wrote, "Our fight is a spiritual fight. It is for man. We are to emancipate man from the meshes that he himself has woven around him. These organizations of national egoism, we have no word for nation in our language. When we borrow this word from other people, it never fits us." Ashish Nandi points to the fine distinction between nationalism and anti-colonialism, writing that Tagore rejected the idea of nationalism, but he practiced anti-imperialist politics throughout his life, at a time when nationalism, patriotism, and anti-imperialism were all considered to be a single word by most Indians. Tagore's critique of the Indian nationalism and his alternative model have to be gleaned from his various essays. Collected in a volume of his Bengali essays, Atmashakti in 1905, the genesis of his idea of India as a non-nation, non-nation, emerged. Notably, Gora's quest is for Bharatbarsha and not for the Indian nation state, although his earlier imaginary of a homogeneous Hindu country is not very far from the borrowed concept of the nation. Tagore also found it ironical that the myth of the advancement of civilization was predicated upon ignoring a huge bulk of people whom we call the subaltern and denying them its human rights. Tagore expressed these ideas in his essays, Nationalism in the West, Nationalism in Japan, and Nationalism in India, collected in his book Nationalism, published in 1916. His novels Gora, The Home and the World, in 4 chapters, carry the same message. Gora's journey through rural Bengal and his first-hand experience of the lives of the downtrodden is a critique of the elitist nature of Indian nationalist politics. Knowledge of the realities of rural Bengal significantly transforms Gora's imaginary of his Hindu Bharatbarsha. He had fervently lectured in public to excite people's mind with the idealistic image of his Bharat, as he had said that there is a real Bharat and rich and full Bharat. Let us therefore forget all this learning from books, this longing for recognition, this pursuit of petty livelihoods, throw all this away and launch our ship towards the very same port. We shall drown if we must, we shall die if we must, hold up the complete form of Bharatbarsha to our people, and they will go mad with excitement. Gora's passionate delineation of an imaginary country is as false and partial as Shondip's imaginary of the motherland in Khoribaire. Deprivation, poverty, superstitions, and bigotry fracture Gora's imaginary port of abundance. In The Home and the World, unbridled nationalism rakes the stability of Shukshayur with a communal riot. In the works of Shumanta Banerjee, in The Home and the World, hovering behind the scenes of the emotional and political tensions within the Nikhilesh Bimala Shundip triangle is the Bengali peasantry. Against the grain of mainstream Hindu nationalism, the politics of the Dalit and the Muslims is presented by Tagore as an essential precondition for the existence of these marginal communities. This, as evident in Gora's eventual realization of his fragmented Bharatbarsha and the fire of communal disharmony produced by Swadeshi in Khoribaire, shows the flawed imagining of the Indian nation. Against the Western modernist idea of the nation as a political entity, Tagore emphasized the efficacy of a morally resilient and economically self-reliant indigenous society that he called Swadeshi Samaj. Swadeshi Samaj, Nation Ki, and Bharatbarsha Samaj posited the question of nation and nationalism in relation to the anti-colonial struggle. Rabindranath marked a distinct turn away from the politics of petition and elitism practiced by the Indian National Congress towards a practical program for the uplift of the masses. This brings to the fore Tagore's own role as a benevolent zamindar. What is most relevant is in Tagore's 3 political novels is the continuous dialogue with oppositional categories and processes of modernity. A project, in which anti-colonialism and a cosmopolitan view of life blended to envisage a human society bereft of man-made boundaries. This is Rabindranath's vision of universal humanity, culminating in a spirit of internationalism. Martha Nussbaum, in her article Patriotism and Cosmopolitanism, 1994, frequently refers to Rabindranath and posits Nikhilesh as a cosmopolitan individual. However, Tagore's Gora is perhaps the first torchbearer of cosmopolitanism or internationalism to opt for a more expansive term. Gora is an exploration of the diverse facets of Indian patriotism through its association with love that is forbidden by society. But more profoundly, it is a story of transforming selfhood and identity, a tale of transition from what is perceived to be the home to the world that eventually becomes the home. For Tagore, humanity is indivisible, and societies such as India's could redeem themselves by adopting the principles of Swadharma, Sarvadharma Samavava, that is deference to all religions, or the Upanishadic dictum of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, meaning the entire world is one family, which can be extended to the political domain for a state of peaceful coexistence among all nations and also within the boundaries of one's own country. Gora's assimilation to the world takes place within his mind at the level of consciousness and completely transforms his Bharatvarsho and his Bharatbhashio self. His experience of village life makes him aware of another Bharat, of poverty, divisiveness, superstition, but also enlightens him about the essential plurality of Indian life. It is Gora's love for a Brahmo lady that binds romantic love and patriotism together. The sanction for such a union comes from Porish Babu, the ideological fulcrum of the novel, who says, "It can't be desirable that human beings should narrow themselves out of regard for society. Instead, it is for society to constantly broaden itself out of regard for human beings." Gora's foster mother, Anandamoyi, who seems to have renounced social conventions of caste, creed, and purity, is a quiet practitioner of such a free worldview, and hence a metonymic embodiment of the Bharatvarsho, which has embraced all regions, caste, creed, and nationality since time immemorial. And Tagore sings, "Hemo chitto punno tirthe jagore dhire, ei bharoter mohamanober sagoro tire." Oceanic expanse of the mankind lay in front, liven up my soul on this great land of India. I stand erect and bow to the God within mankind, my hymnic chants ever appraising, clasped hands thrust out in respect. The epiphanic moment of Gora's rebirth is marked with a vision of transcendence that subsumes the world within the geographical boundaries of Bharatvarsho. He says, "Within me there is no conflict between communities, whether Hindu or Muslim or Christian. Today all the castes of Bharat are my caste. I'm so pure now that I do not fear being defiled even in a low caste household." The use of facticity in place of historical factuality is most conspicuous in Gora, where no particular historical or political incident is used as the point of reference. This vagueness is perfectly conducive to the vision of spiritual transcendence of the novel. Contrarily, in both Ghore Baire and Charodhyay, the political context is clearly etched as a background to the human drama through which Tagore explores the narrations of the nation. In Ghore Baire and Charodhyay, or 4 chapters, the tussle between home and the world is unambiguously the conflict between individuals and the world of nationalist politics, entrenched in the vocabulary of violence. The women's question in colonial Bengal, and by extension in India, was closely intertwined with the problem of national self-determination. Within the upper-class Hindu society, the liberal and revivalist nationalist construction of womanhood mapped the processes through which the private negotiated with the public sphere to frame the Indian nation. In the midst of a notable epistemic shift and a fervent dialogue between tradition and modernity, emerged these 2 seminal texts of Rabindranath, The Home and the World in 1919 and 4 chapters or Charodhyay in 1934. These novels bring to the fore the problems embedded in a woman's negotiation between the public and the private, the indigenous and the exogenous, against the background of a nationalist culture of violence and revolutionary politics. In world literature, woman's common act of transgression has taken the forms of different kinds of border crossings, such as assertion of emotional, economic, and sexual liberty, participation in politics and war, and religious devotion. Ibsen's A Doll's House, 1879, marked a literary articulation of feminist consciousness in Europe by repudiating the concept of separate spheres. Nora's exit from the Doll's House marks a firm renunciation of femininity as a patriarchal construct, home, familial bondages, and private enclosures. When the women's question in Asian countries was being debated in the colonized countries of Asia in connection with nationalism and anti-colonial struggle, a doll's house, as Jayavardhana tells us in the book Feminism and Nationalism in the Third World, was discussed in both China and India. Jawaharlal Nehru, in a lecture delivered in 1928 to a group of women students, referred to Noda's struggle as an inspiration to her colonial sisters. In my talk, I shall focus mainly on Ghore Baire because, again, as I said, it is part of the UG syllabus. Moreover, I'd spoken in some detail on Charodhai while talking about the Victorian construction of the new woman, the Victorian appropriation of the new Victorian new woman in Tagore. And this lecture is already in YouTube and can be accessed if anybody is willing. So Tagore's political novel, give a kind of a background, these two political novels, they specially provide a discursive space where the contradictions within the discourses of gender and its relation to the nation are clearly explored. The author's quasi-conservative attitude to womanhood as denizens of a sanctified private sphere, iterated in several essays on Indian womanhood and marriage, needs to be juxtaposed with Tagore's intellectual commitment to the cause of female education, liberation, and empowerment, which is again manifest in his real appreciation of the Brahmo women of his household and in his delineation of several novenas or new women in literature. The text of Ghore Baire and the Home and the World also contextualizes a significant phase in the growth of Bengali female subjectivity, women's education, and active participation in the freedom struggle. While apparently the development showcased the attempts to connect reformed Indian womanhood with the nationalist struggle, it also ruptured the discursive construction of colonial womanhood by exposing the ideologies of conjugality and domestic stability to dangers. Set in the backdrop of the revolutionary politics of Bengal, Tagore's most controversial novel, 4 Chapters, is a scathing critic of the ideology of violence in Indian nationalist struggle and its impact on Indian womanhood. Ashish Nandi, in discussing Tagore's reaction to Indian nationalism, points out that colonialism is implicated in the legitimization of violence. Tagore's novels constantly fractures the grand narrative of nationalist masculinity by juxtaposing the virile protagonists and their doubles. However, in both The Home and the World and 4 Chapters, the failure to merge the self and the nation is somewhat predicated on the inability of the female protagonist to value the social structures of Hindu domesticity and articulation and conjugality. There seems to be an apparent fixity in the articulations of nation and womanhood, apparent as I said. But both the texts raise questions that destabilize the categories of gendered subjectivity in relation to the Indian nation. In the moral parlance of her own time, Ira is very anti-conventional. She is unjust and impure because she is tainted by her exposure to education, her male compatriots, and of course the exigencies of the public sphere. Like Bimala's, even Ela's participation in nationalist politics is limited to inspiring men to action as the queen bee. Both them are regarded as some kind of an erotic symbol. The question of sexual desire also appears as a problem in 19th century Indian nationalism. Ideologues such as Bankim Chandra, Vivekananda, Aurobindo, and even Gandhi argued in favor of ascetic nationalism. Tagore, in both The Home and the World and 4 Chapters, explores the problematic connection of sexuality with nationalism, but treats sexual desire as an essential component of human experience. While Ella forcefully renounces home to join the world of revolutionary politics, Bimala hardly goes beyond the boundaries of her house in Shukshire. It is a world that impinges upon her home and shatters its equilibrium and the sanctity of conjugal life. The intrusion of the world into Bimala's life takes various forms. Her husband, who first undertakes the project of transforming Bimala into an educated and enlightened woman under the tutelage of Miss Gilby, Bimala's own attraction for the Swadeshi movement, and finally through Shondip. Bimala herself is no less responsible for unleashing the world with the dangers of its surreptitious ways and modes, because she herself suffers from narcissistic impulses that are justified as nationalism or patriotism. On the day when she hears Shondip's very fiery speech and has an eye contact with him, Bimala begins to recreate herself in her imagination, and I quote from the novel, "The vision that I had of myself as the Shakti incarnate, crowning Shondip Babu simply with my presence, majestic and unashamed." But Bimala fails to distinguish the fine line between a true self-sacrificing patriotism and her veiled desire to attract men with physical beauty. It is her own desire for recognition that makes her an easy prey to Shondip's devious design. Bimala in the novel muses at one point, "I will tell the exact truth. That day I reproached my creator because he had not made me surpassingly beautiful, not to steal any heart away, but because beauty is glory. In this great day, the men of the country should realize its goddess in its beauty. Would Shondip Babu find the Shakti of the motherland manifest in me? Or would it simply take me to be an ordinary domestic woman? I was utterly unconscious of myself. I was no longer the lady of the Raja's house, but the sole representative of Bengal's womanhood. And he was the champion of Bengal." The deficiency in Shondip's own brand of nationalism, couched in a rhetoric of heightened sentimentality and false exaltation, is deftly covered up through his projection of Bimala as an object of public devotion. And Bimala again thinks aloud. "Shondip Babu made it clear how all the country was in need of me. I had no difficulty in believing this at the time, for I felt that I had the power to do everything. Divine strength had come to me." Bimala's unpredictable position between the Ghor and the Bahir, between a limited role as a wife and a newly acquired status of a quasi-divine entity, brings her under Shondip's control. Bimala has always wanted to imagine herself as a public icon, whether in the role of the ideal Pativrata like her mother, and as the very embodiment of wifely virtues. But she was never truly domesticated. Nikhilesh's advocacy for truth and justice is beyond her comprehension. She can only align herself with feelings of self-absorbed devotion, either as a dedicated wife or as a nationalist. She is easily swept by superlatives, blatant physical attraction, and has difficulty in comprehending her husband's model of companionate marriage. Nikhilesh muses, Bimala has no patience with patience. She loves to find in men the turbulent, the angry, the unjust. Her respect must have its element of fear. I had hoped that when Bimala found herself free in the outer world, she would be rescued from her infatuation for tyranny. But now I feel that this infatuation is deep down in her nature. Her love is for the boisterous, from the tip of her tongue to the pit of her stomach. She must tingle with red paper in order to enjoy the simple fare of life. Nikhilesh wanted to expose Bimala to the unpredictabilities of the outer world, symbolically represented as allowing Shondip to see her. For Nikhilesh, it was also a test of the truth of his relationship with her. As he says, that the passage from the narrow to the larger world is stormy. When she is familiar with his freedom, then I shall know where my place is. His liberal project of wife-making, predicated upon honest and true love, is again not without its vulnerability. It is no less paternalistic than Shondip's apotheosis of woman. His ethical impulses remain directed towards himself, which made him eventually forget the real Bimala. His self-analysis turns into an avid critique of the nationalist deification of woman, as Nikhilesh comes to a point when he realizes that Bimala is drifting away from him, and he tries to understand why it has happened. And he says that I was too greedy, I created an angel of Bimala in order to exaggerate my own enjoyment. The creator, but Bimala is what she is. and the Creator is again under no obligation to supply me with angels just because I have an avidity for imaginary perfection. Nikhilesh has unleashed a process, but realized that he is incapable of controlling its consequences. In the tussle, between Ghar and Bahir, Nikhilesh has come to realize the very tinsel nature of conjugal relationship, professed either as an eternal bond of several lives by Hindu Shastra and sacralized by society as indissoluble, or even the vulnerability of the modern companionate marriage idealized as the seat of mutual love. At the level of the plot, as Bimala finally rejects Shondip and returns to Nikhilesh, she becomes an individual crisscrossed by several possibilities. At the end of her adulterous involvement with Shondip, Bimala seems to acquire a full understanding of woman's position in the world, the imperative to keep within limits, within the bangs, otherwise she destroys everything. The question remains, what is the nature of woman's limit? Does this mean the confines of domesticity alone? In case of Mrinal in Stree Patra, the wife's letter, Tagore seems to have no qualms in freeing Mrinal from the bondage of a loveless conjugal life. And in placing her beneath the boundless sky, she reminds us of Nora, who is finally brought out, or who brings herself out of a doll's house. However, with Bimala, he seems to have reached an ideological impasse. Like Binodini of Chokhet Bali, Bimala is an adulteress too, but she cannot be dismissed as socially unwanted or unaccommodated. Bimala uses her position as Nikhilesh's wife to cross her limits, very often with the connivance of her husband. And the problem of deciding her predicament lies in the fact that she tries to dissolve the divide between home and the world through her nationalism. Bimala never reaches the world in the way Nikhilesh wanted her to. Instead, she equates the world with Shondip. This is perfectly in sync with her comfort zone of bhakti or devotion, only that it has shifted now from Nikhilesh to Shondip. By projecting the model of Hindu womanhood, which ideally belongs to the inner domain of the home, as an icon of mass inspiration, Shondip makes full use of Bimala's confusion and also corrupts the iconic status of Hindu womanhood, reducing it to a mere object of erotic desire. And the quote that I will now read out from Shondip is actually very, very significant. B was not conscious because she was ashamed of the reality, to which men have given a bad name, calling it Satan. And so it has to steal into the garden of paradise in the guise of a snake and whisper secrets into the ears of man's chosen consort and make her rebellious. Then farewell to all ease, and after that comes death. Caught in the wave of Sandip's false idolatry and magnetic physical attraction, Bimala stands at the threshold, neither here nor there. The open ending of the novel is indicative of this undecidability. By placing Bimala between two strands of nationalism, both of which envisage women's idealized participation as an essential element, Tagore also shows the impossibility of reconciling these two ways of narrating India. Bimala does enjoy agency in asserting her ego as, of course, in asserting her ego and as she has said, through devotion or bhakti to her husband, and of course through her devotion to nation. But her claim for subjectivity remains partial because it is realized only through a surrender either to Nikhilesh or Shondip. As the world impinges upon the secure precincts of her home, it transforms the meaning of home. I shall conclude this talk with an observation from Professor Supriya Chaudhury's essay, Love and Marriage in the Home and the World. Bimala's sentimental education leads her from a traditional model of womanhood to a state of radical incompleteness, where the models she seeks have disintegrated, leaving her in the confusion and uncertainty which Rabindranath sees as characteristic of modernity. Bimala's sexual and moral awakening is integral to her new sensibility, which at the end of the novel is left open to the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your enriching and expansive deliberation. This talk,
Thank you.
where
Thank you for
you touched on the from the background of the Bengal Renaissance and the associated discourse on gender, colonialism, nationalism, and so much more. And not only for home and the world, but also for Gora and Charodhai. And of course, like many people have said in the comments, I was really taken back to my Websu days where I was attending your classes on Gora. And I've surely taken down a lot of notes, ma'am. So, with your permission, we can move on to the interactive session because this chat box is full of questions, both in
yeah, sure. Let me just go to the chat box once again myself and see what questions have come.
Okay, ma'am.
But you can, of course, pick up your questions and tell me, because that would be better.
For the interactive session, I ask Professor Swara Thacker to take the questions from Google Meet first.
Yeah, thank you, Deepayan. Thank you, ma'am, for your
You're most
lecture.
welcome. And also thanks to all the participants for giving me such a patient hearing.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I'll just take up a few questions from the Google Meet chat box. The first one is that even after so many years of the end of the colonial rule, Tagore's The Home and the World remains astonishingly relevant. So even today, in today's times. So your comments on that.
Actually, that is what I had started with, because, even today, the categories of home and world, or that is the kind of relation or dynamism between the private and the public sphere, the way we understand home and the world, is very relevant in the various processes of narrating the Indian nation. The reason why there has been several retellings and reinterpretations of Tagore's political novels, especially The Home and the World, and also Charodhai. So that is the reason perhaps why it is very, very relevant and also intriguing to us, because we try to reinterpret what we read in Chakravarty by recontextualizing it in our own times.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Another comment is that can you please discuss The Home and the World from a psychoanalytical perspective?
Well, I will not really go into a psychoanalytical reading, but again, you see, the way the narrative structure of the novel is laid, it goes into a sort of a mode of atmakatha, or a confessional mode, where each character is giving out his own thought, kind of thinking aloud. Okay, so there is a there is no third person narrator who takes control of everything, but we get the entire events from the perspectives of the three characters who kind of engage in a complex dialogue with one another. The same incident is being represented in three different ways by three different characters. Okay, now I have not tried ever to kind of lend this, or kind of or to read this in a psychoanalytic way, because I find that Tagore's novels, we do more justice to Tagore's novels if we keep in mind the time Tagore was writing, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, ma'am. So the next question is, can we say that Tagore's politics exhibited a marked ambivalence? On one hand, he denounced European imperialism, and on the other, he shunned the Swadeshi movement.
There were phases of ambivalence, definitely, because if you remember, when the Swadeshi movement started, Tagore was very enthusiastic about it. He came out into the roads, he began the Rakhi Utsav, and he tied Rakhi in the hands of the Muslim people. But then when he found that Swadeshi movement was turning into a kind of a mass euphoria, and it was kind of losing control, losing a rational approach, then Tagore turned away from it, because he felt that it is again turning into some kind of a opium for the masses, and people are using it to for their own gains, as in the case of Shondip in Ghore Baire. So Tagore was he turned into a very, very avid, very staunch critic of this brand of nationalism. So yes, there is ambivalence at one point of time, but then he was coming out of it, and he was quite clearly, quite firmly, he was expressing his criticism of Indian nationalism.
Okay, ma'am. So I'll just take up one or two more questions. Is Nikhilesh a representative of the post-colonial modern man? So somebody wants your comments on that.
Why post-colonial modern man? I mean, Nikhilesh is very much a product of his own time. Nikhilesh, the kind of modernity, the kind of confusion that Nikhilesh himself harbors, he wants to educate his wife, he wants his wife to be enlightened, but at the same time, when he sees Bimala drifting away, he is hurt by that. He wants to possess her at the same time. So the confusion of the home and the world is not just something that characterizes the life of Bimala, but it is very much a life of a part of Nikhilesh's life as well. So Nikhilesh is a product of colonial modernity. He is not a post-colonial creature.
Okay, ma'am. So the last question that I'll take up from GMeet is that why is Tagore's concept of nationalism or Bharat Borsho, instead of being spiritual, productive and feminine, why cannot it accommodate Ilas or Bimalas stepping into the world outside? And why women are always seen as inherently a materialistic lure in the spiritual practice of Swadeshi? While Bankim Chandra, despite many contradictions in his anti-imperialist feelings, had been able to portray both the characters of Shanti and Kalyani in Anandumot. So that's quite long.
This is Timni, of course, very characteristic of her writing a question as big as her answer, perhaps. Okay, let's get to the question myself, because I have forgotten where it has started. Well, is why Tagore's concept of nationalism or Bharat Borsho, instead of being spiritual, productive, feminine, cannot accommodate Elas or Bimalas stepping into the world outside. Tagore does, first question, this first product, that Tagore doesn't deny Bharat Borsho as a spiritual entity. The point is that regarding idealizing Bharat Borsho as something either as a feminine entity or as a spiritual presence is something that Tagore is critical about. He wants to see Bharat Borsho as a country as it really is. This is one thing, and again, Tagore, if you have read through Gora very carefully, then Tagore will not say at any point in time that his Bharat Borsho has some kind of a gendered entity. When he admits that Anandamoyi is his Bharat Borsho, Anandamoyi is looked upon as a mother, once again not as a feminine figure, but as the spirit of motherhood who can embrace various creeds and caste and everything. He is actually identifying Anandamoyi with the spirit of Bharat Borsho, not with any sort of a gendered identity. Tagore is not against women stepping out into the world, but again, a product of colonial modernity. The confusion or the kind of ambivalence that we see in Nikhilesh is also a part of Tagore's life. What is the threshold? What is the ultimate limit of women's freedom? Is a question that I think plagues Tagore so far as Ghore Baire and Ela is concerned. So this is it. And why women are always seen as inherently a materialistic lure in the spiritual practice of Swadeshi. You see, what we call the spiritual practice of Swadeshi is so deeply entrenched in a language and a rhetoric of falseness and hypocrisy that projection of women as an erotic, sexualized being is not something unnatural. Moreover, because women were not supposed to come outside. When they did come outside, they are bound to allure a lot of minds. So people like Shondip or for instance Indranath would always like to make use of these female figures as their queen bees. When Bankim Chandra, despite many contradictions in his anti-imperialism, had been able to portray both the characters of Shanti and Kalyani in Anandumot. Well, I really don't understand this part of the question. Bankim Chandra's Shanti and Kalyani are completely different from Bimala and Ela. And again, Bankim Chandra Anandumot as I taught you in the class, it raises the plane of action, human action, to a very different level, a kind of mythical level, which Tagore doesn't do at all. He places his characters very much in the real context of the Swadeshi boycott movement. Okay, so when we come to Shanti, Shanti is a character who is trying to uplift Jibanandu to the level of ascetic renunciation. And Kolnani somehow, despite being a domesticated woman, a wife, remains a seductress. She herself believes that she is behind the downfall of some of the Santans. Okay, I don't know, because I have not really understood the last part of Tini's question, so I don't know if my answer is satisfactory.
Oh, ma'am, it is. Okay. Okay, so now I will pass on this interactive session to Deepayan. He'll pass on the queries from the YouTube chat box.
Thank you, Swara. The first question I got from here is that someone asked, is there a similarity between Ghore Baire and Prince Otto by R.L. Stevenson?
My God. I mean, you can find films running similarity in anything, but I don't know. I've never given it such a thought. I mean, never tried to link the two.
And the second question, which is like very relevant, and even I had some kind this question, a kind of this question, like how do we use Tagore's idea of nationalism to resist the present day heightened the firebrand nationalism in present day politics in India?
Better not talk about this because this is political. But as you know, of course, Hindutva, that we call, what we see as a firebrand nationalism in today's concept, has drawn not from its lifeblood, not so much from Tagore, but a lot from Bankim Chandra. Whether rightly or wrongly, I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that. Had Tagore lived, I mean, which is impossible, given that he was a human being, but hypothetically, if he had lived, I don't think he would have approved of the kind of nationalism that we are experiencing today, just as he had not supported the Swadeshi boycott movement or that kind of revolutionary, aggressive nationalism of his own time. Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I'll pass this on to Swara again for the vote of thanks and the concluding notes.
Okay, thank you, Deepayan. Respected guests and dear participants, on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank all of you for being a part of the online lecture series organized by the Department of English, THK Jain College. Your cooperation and active participation has played a major role in making our endeavor successful. This is our first attempt at organizing such a lecture series on an online platform, and it gives us immense happiness that even under such trying circumstances, we have been able to perform our academic duty of sharing and enhancing knowledge about our subject, to open up new avenues of discussion and introduce different ways of looking at the texts prescribed in the CBCS syllabus. Our first session was conducted by Professor Dr. Chandrani Biswas, who gave a comprehensive overview of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, laying emphasis on the post-colonial perspective. The second session had Professor Dr. Maua Bhomik at the helm. She not only gave a detailed background of the modern period, but managed to cover all the crucial aspects of T.S. Eliot's Preludes and the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock within a short time. Professor Dr. Suchandana Bhattacharya introduced the concept of the American dream and its failure in the third session with reference to Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. Today's session, which was conducted by Professor Dr. Chandrava Chakraborty, focused on Tagore's idea of nationalism as presented in his political novels, especially Home and the World. I would like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Dr. Chandrava Chakraborty for accepting our invitation and giving us the opportunity to listen to her analysis of Tagore's nationalism. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your perspective with us. It will
You're
surely
most welcome.
It will surely help the audience to read Tagore's texts from a different point of view and rekindle interest in his political novels. I take this opportunity to once again thank all our speakers for being a part of our online lecture series and going out of the way to make each lecture session comprehensive, informative, and interesting. I would also like to express my gratitude to our patrons, Shree Sardar Kankaria, President of Shree S.S. Jain Sabha, Shree Sohan Singhvi, President of the Governing Body of THK Jain College, Shree Lalit Kankaria, Secretary of the Governing Body, and other respected members. A special mention needs to be made here of the immense support and encouragement that we have received from our Principal Madam, Dr. Mausumi Singh Sengupta. Thank you, ma'am, for always guiding us. Once again, I thank all the participants, and we hope to receive the same overwhelming response from your side for our future endeavors as well. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bishash. Thank you all. Thank you all the participants. Thank you organizers for your immense effort for a successful completion of the seminar. So we expect that in near future we can organize such a webinar series for all for faculty members as well as students. So thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
So we announce our session closed here. Over.
Okay, ma'am.
So about feedback, Swara,
I have
yes, you share yes the important things about the feedback. Okay.
The feedback is shared both in Google Meet and YouTube chat box. Participants are requested to fill it up. Thank you.
Yeah, please fill up the feedback form. It is mandatory to get the e-certificate. The link has been shared in both the chat boxes. So please click on the link and fill up the form carefully.
Swara,
Yeah.
someone is asking.
Yeah, I'm
about the
writing that. Yeah, I'm just typing the reply.
Swara, should I wait 2 more minutes before stopping the
Yeah.
stream? Because I think the
Yeah,
chat
live
box will
streaming
disappear.
is, yeah, live streaming you can stop, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the chat box will disappear if I stop the live stream. So that's why. So because
But is the live streaming public? Then I think the chat box will also remain there.
I'm not so sure about the process after the live stream ends actually. So let's just stop after 2 minutes because we'll re-upload the record once again.
Okay. Rohan, you may leave. You were asking me that, right? You may leave. Yeah, good that you received the certificate. Deepayan and Oindrila,
Yes.
Yes.
I think we can end the meeting here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I'm ending the stream now.
Okay.